Hey everyone, Mehdi Hasan knows who has an outsized influence on U.S. foreign policy. Take a look.
They're worried about losing their jobs. They're worried about being called anti-Semitic. They're worried about being targeted by AIPAC. They're worried about being targeted by their political opponents, etc., etc. The idea that there isn't a very, very powerful pro-Israel lobby is absurd, just as there is a very powerful gun lobby.
I'm Rich Lowry of National Review, and Hasan, of course, is a left-wing journalist. He was on the Trigonometry podcast there. Now, this belief in the inordinate influence, perhaps nefarious influence of the Israeli or Jewish lobby is not something you just hear on the left. You also hear it on the right. Here was Joe Kent on the Tucker Carlson podcast a week or so ago.
These big, heavy lifts of regime change that America has been engaged in, Israel could not do on their own, which is where you get back to the Israeli lobby being just so potent and so powerful and so aggressive.
So this is another instance of the horseshoe theory at work, where the left and the right meet and have a consensus on a certain issue, in this case, how reprehensible and potent the pro-Israel lobby is. So is this the right way to look at U.S. foreign policy and the generally, with exceptions, pro-Israel posture of the United States government in recent years? No, I don't think so. No doubt AIPAC is a strong lobbying group. You have other Jewish groups that are quite influential, but are they really driving things? No. Want to explain why in this video. Let's first go to the NRA. So what we're hearing about the power of AIPAC and other such groups reminds me very much of what we used to hear about the National Rifle Association, that the National Rifle Association was so well-heeled, so organizationally robust that it drove an irrational gun policy in the United States that was not in the public interest. And at the end of the day, the public didn't support. It was just because they had a hammerlock on Congress, thanks to its lobbying and its electioneering and all its other works. Now, you don't hear about the NRA so much anymore today. It's been hurt by internal strife, by financial scandal. It's really in many ways a shadow of its former self. And yet, U.S. gun policy is the same because it was driven by large structural factors, bigger and more important than any one lobbying group. Obviously, the Second Amendment's very elemental here. You have broadly pro-gun sentiment in the country, hundreds of millions of guns in circulation, and just not enough people supporting banning guns to change this arrangement. So what people thought was the work of the NRA was actually the NRA riding in the slipstream of much broader factors in American society and government. And I think the same is true with Israel here. The pro-Israel orientation of the United States is not driven by one lobbying group or group of powerful donors. There are all sorts of ways in which the all-powerful Israeli lobby narrative doesn't add up. One of them, just to take recent history, is you think this all-powerful lobby would have stopped Barack Obama's JCPOA, this nuclear deal with Iran that let Iran sit on the cusp of a nuclear weapon at the same time it's spreading its tentacles throughout the Middle East. It would have stopped it in its tracks, but it couldn't stop the centerpiece of the Middle East policy of this two-term Democratic president. All sorts of other ways it doesn't add up as well. The brilliant foreign policy analyst Walter Russell Mead addresses some of them in his fantastic book, The Ark of a Covenant. If you walk through the history, in 1937, Britain issues the Peel Report limiting Jewish migration into Britain at a time of rising Nazi persecution. The U.S. doesn't do anything to challenge this. Jews in the U.S. can't mobilize, as Mead points out, the United States against Hitler. They can't even get FDR during the war to bomb the rail lines leading to Auschwitz. So the Jews are powerless in the United States at their hour of most desperate need, circa 1944. But then in 1948, when Truman's president and recognizes Israel, suddenly all powerful again. And then their influence declines after that because Eisenhower and JFK, they are trying to bring along Egypt as our major ally in the Middle East, not Israel. As Mead points out, the broader trajectory of the U.S.-Israel relationship seems to suggest an underlying factor here, right? In the 50s and 60s, when Israel is weak, we're kind of standoffish to Israel. Israeli prime ministers don't visit the White House. It's not that just that we don't provide aid to Israel. We ban Israel from buying our weapons. It's only as Israel becomes stronger that the U.S. in turn develops a stronger relationship with Israel, which would seem to suggest maybe there's a larger geopolitical factor here at work rather than the lobbying of a few shadowy groups. Here's a rundown of top lobbying groups by amount spent. U.S. Chamber of Commerce, National Association of Realtors, American Chemistry Council, Amazon.com, CTIA, it's a wireless association, America's Health Insurance Plans, Southern Co., and Altria. The larger point here is that we're a free society with a lot of lobbying going on with all sorts of groups in all sorts of ways, oftentimes directly at variance with one another. And these lobbying groups tend to be most successful in Washington when they're focusing on a really minute question of public policy or minute change in public policy that doesn't matter to the broader public, doesn't cause a big political debate, but matters a lot to some narrow special interest. That's not the case with the U.S.-Israel relationship. That's a really big deal that is not decided behind closed doors during some committee, a meeting of congressional staff of some congressional committee. It just doesn't happen that way. Now, AIPAC seeks to be influential, obviously, but it's not seeking to directly influence or direct a president's foreign policy. It's focused much more on Congress and on maintaining U.S. security assistance to Israel, which is a big deal. It's controversial. A lot of people oppose it, but it's not the Iran war. And by the way, Jews are not monolithic. This is another point made by Walter Russell Mead. By and large, Jews tend to be liberal and tend to be Democrats. Barack Obama got more Jewish votes than both John McCain and Mitt Romney, got more Jewish donations than John McCain and Mitt Romney. In 2012, Barack Obama got about 70% of Jewish donations in that election compared to Mitt Romney. Jews voted against George W. Bush despite Bush waging supposedly a war in Iraq for Jewish interests. Jews voted against Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020. As Mead points out, if just U.S. Jews had been the ones to decide, our embassy in Israel would still be in Tel Aviv. We never would have recognized the annexation of the Golan Heights, and we'd be pressuring Israel relentlessly on its settlement policies. As for Donald Trump in particular, this might be the least lobbyable, in a formal sense, president of the United States we've ever had. Yes, he has friends who are Jewish, family members who are Jewish, who are advisors that he's listening to on Middle Eastern policy and how to deal with Israel and Iran, but it's not AIPAC. AIPAC's not in any of these meetings. And if Donald Trump weren't himself sincerely pro-Israel and didn't sincerely hate the regime in Iran, none of this would be happening. He's the most stubborn, willful president of the United States we've ever had, certainly have ever had since, say, Andrew Jackson. Now, there's no doubt that AIPAC and other pro-Israel groups are playing very heavily in Democratic primaries. We saw in Illinois just a couple weeks ago, 4 contested primaries there. AIPAC plays, and all of them goes 2 for 2. They won 2, and they lost 2. That's how it works in electoral politics in America. Now, money matters. All things considered, you'd rather have money, but it doesn't determine electoral outcomes. And when a tide of public opinion is moving one way, it's very hard to stop it. And we see, despite AIPAC's efforts, the Democratic Party is swinging very heavily against Israel. And by the way, the types of Democrats that AIPAC tends to defeat are radical squad-like Democrats. You'd think it'd be a good thing for conservatives, for candidates like that to go down. And by the way, the Democrats that AIPAC supports, these aren't fierce Donald Trump style Iran hawks. They just don't hate Israel, which again, you'd think would be a good thing if you want our debate in this country to be more rational. But rationality is not what these critics of the Jewish lobby on the left and the right are after. They have a deep emotional commitment to the idea there's some sort of nefarious influence here that goes to a deep and often a very dark place having to do with the poisonous influence of the Jews. I'm Rich Lowry, over and out.